Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest Power Up series for SuiteProjects Pro. I'm Ronn Breaux, CEO of TopStep. Thank you for joining. Today's topics is tips and tricks for effective utilization reporting. So TopStep works with hundreds of professional service organizations, and all of them care about utilization. It is the lifeblood of professional service organizations, and it's critical to be able to have on-demand ready reports that you can pull to evaluate how your organization is doing, how utilized are they, where do you have gaps, and how to react to those. Before you can have any of that, you've got to have really strong reports. The challenge we run into is every organization has a different definition of utilization. Some are billable productive, some include holidays, some exclude holidays. So there's lots of flavors of utilization reports that we run into with our customers. The good news is because they've selected SuiteProjects Pro as their PSA, there are lots of different abilities in the product to be able to come up with multiple utilization calculations. So we're going to take a look at some features and functions of what we typically work with and see when we're helping our customers design their utilization reports. Let's start by taking a look at user setup options that you have to impact your utilization reports. Let's take a look at Bill Carr. Bill's a current employee, and we want to calculate utilization for Bill. Bill started at the end of last year. And when we run utilization for last year, we only want to include Bill for the time he was with the organization. We don't want him to drag down the utilization for previous periods because he was not employed at that time. Well, if you simply use whether they were active or not active or a higher date, you're not going to get the desired utilization reporting that you want. The way to achieve what I'm describing here is to use what's called entity tags. And entity tags allow you to create custom fields with custom drop-down options, but you could have start and end dates on those fields. So in this example, we created an employment status field. Bill is active as of today, but between these dates down here, and I usually pick a date way in the past that I would never go back and report against, up to the day before Bill started. So in this example, he started on 12/6. And, so we don't want to count Bill for anything. So if I were to run utilization for either 2025 or December of 2025, I would only want to be able to pick up the time Bill spent with us for that period. And that way, Bill is only counting towards those time periods where he was actually with the company. There's also entity tags we see handling like department moves. So if someone started off in Department A and then they got moved at some point in Department B, and you have department owners running utilization for their departments, well, you want to be able to show that Bill was in Department A for a period of time and then he was moved to B. So those entity tags, again, allow you to be able to track the movement from one department to another, one employment status to another, or anything else you need to be able to set at a user level for start and end date timeframes to be able to capture. And then when you go to create your utilization report, you can select show me only when they were active based on how I'm slicing and dicing the data. So in my opinion, entity tags are a critical component of an accurate utilization. Target utilization is an optional feature. I wanted to cover it because we have probably half of our customers benefiting from it, half do not use it. The benefit of target utilization is being able to set a target on a particular user. No, you cannot set a target at a department level. You have to set it at the user level. Now, you can have multiple targets. So, for example, when Bill joined, he was at 50% utilization target. But then in March, he got to 80%. So you could stair step someone into utilization. And what this allows you to do is be able to report on what was their actual hours they worked against their target hours to be able to compare utilization. Because in most organizations, nobody's at 100% or 80% for everybody. Even at Top Step, we have some users that have different utilization metrics than others. And so if I want to run a report and I want to say, oh, I see Jim is 60%, but how do I know 60% is good or bad for Jim? So being able to set targets and be able to compare actuals to targets allowed me to be able to know quickly who's meeting their targets and who's not meeting their targets, even though the targets could change per person. So we'll take a look at this a little bit when we get into some of the report example I'm going to walk through. So now I've got to be able to determine what hours do I want to include in my report and what hours don't. That's really where custom calculations and setup of the system is impacted. First, we need to determine if billable is by far the number one utilization. So we'll talk about that primarily today. I've also seen other flavors of utilization, how many hours someone spend doing sales work, productive, but I'll say billable by far and beyond is the most common. And how do you want to tag hours as billable? Well, there's a few different ways you could do it. Task type is probably the most popular option. It allows you to be able to tag a task behind the scenes that then gets picked up at the timesheet process. So someone's entering time, they're picking a task, the task type gets stamped on the time entry, and now you can group all those time entries by the common task type. And you can customize this list of task types to any list that you want to be able to report against. Some of our customers report by this non-billable task, which could also work. If you want to say, show me all time entered against all tasks that this non-billable is not checked, that also could be a workable solution, although not quite as popular. Another option is there is an optional setting called a time type. And then the benefit of a time type is you can expose it at the timesheet and allows the users to select from the time type. So if you wanted to have your users determining if what they're doing for a particular project and task is billable or non-billable, or also saying utilized or non-utilized, you can have those selections there. We typically don't recommend this because users inherently will select the wrong value if you let them. There is an optional setting, though, that does help with that. You can turn on a setting that allows you to filter time types by project. And what that means is on a project record, you can say these time types are available for this project. When that's enabled, time type moves from column 1 to column 3 because you have to first choose a project before you can then select the task type. So for example, if internal projects, I would only allow non-billable because you could never have billable hours. So you can limit the time types to the type of project it is, which could cut down on some of your errors. But in either way, whether you're using non-billable task types or time types, once you have all the time entries stamped, now we have to go and build our reports. And the way that we typically do that is through custom calcs. There are some standard reports out of the box. There's an historical percent utilization advanced report that could be used. There's some out of the box ones that come with the product, but we typically like to start from scratch because again, we want to really understand the utilization calculations, what they're using it for, and then we want to be able to start building those calculations and then building the report. In this calculation example, I'm actually applying a calculated field to a standard field. Billable hours was a calculated field created by applying timesheet all hours times a constant and then filtering by either non-billable or time type or task type. So then you create that value, billable hours, and now you create the second half of the utilization, which is where you're applying the numerator to the denominator. So in this example, I've got billable hours divided by work schedule hours. So what are work schedule hours? Work schedule hours are your work schedule you're assigned, which in my case is 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, subtracting any built-in holidays. So, for example, if we have Memorial Day and I'm expected to, my work schedule hours for that week would be 32 hours. You also have the option to ignore holidays and select the base work schedule. Base work schedule would strip out the Memorial Day in my example. So in that case, if I work the 32 hours and I build all 32, I'm still only, I'm not 100% because I'm 32 over my 40 hours versus 32 over 32 hours. So again, depending on how you want to determine utilization, we've got some that also subtract PTO. So you could you could subtract PTO hours from your work schedule also. So again, everyone has a slightly different idea of how they need to track their PTO and their utilization. Once we create these values, now we have to go generate our report. So generate the report, we add all of the values that we want to be able to validate that we've got the right calculation. So in this example, I want to look at billable utilization. I'm pulling in the billable hours value, and I'm also pulling in the work schedule value. Because what that allows me to do is say, okay, I'm showing bill at 67% for the month of Feb. Of those hours he worked, 100 were deemed billable, 150 was expected for the month. If you do the math, you get 67%. So this is correctly calculating it. And then if I wanted to also add in their target utilization, I could see that, his 50%, which means he was targeted to work 75 hours. So he was targeted 75, he worked 100. Thus, he was 67% of his billable utilization compared to the 50% it was expected to be. So Bill exceeded our expectation for the month of February. So again, it's really helpful to add in all the different values here to be able to then validate the percent. And then once you're ready and you've validated it, it's easy enough to strip these out if you no longer need them and be able to then save this report with little less detail maybe than you would up front. Once the report is saved, you now have the ability to create dashboards. We can filter these reports so when users run them, they only see themselves. So if you have bonus-based utilization, you could create a bonus utilization report, share it with the org, and they can then self-help themselves by seeing what their utilization is at any given time. Point and click utilization, no gaps, no surprises, and you get great reporting and great dashboards from very good data in your SuiteProjects Pro environment. Thanks again for joining today. If you want to know more about TopStep, feel free to hit us up on our website, topstepllc.com. We're also all over LinkedIn. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you to see how TopStep might help you improve your utilization reporting.